So today we're looking at podcasting. Podcasting is literally it's a phenomenal entertainment. It's a phenomenal PR tool. And I think for the most part, when we think of podcasting, a lot of people think of it as an entertainment, a talk show, something to listen to. But as a public relations tool, it's just so underrated. And I want to share that with you today and see if we can change that. Now we're looking at, this is a master class, a PR master class. So we're going to look at it from a public relations lens. So just for starters, let's just define public relations. And this is directly from Toastmasters International. Public relations is a strategic communication process that builds mutually beneficial relationships between organizations and their publics. So the goal of Toastmasters themselves is basically to create awareness, a positive awareness of the brand in order to attract members, new members, and to gain existing ones. I think we have a few more people coming in here. And to gain a few more, and to attract new members and retain existing members. If we look at podcasting, Podcasting, I'm sure many of you are familiar with the concept, but in essence, it's really an on-demand internet radio show that you can listen to, you can stream, you can download. For the most part, it's in an MP3 format or an AAC format, and it's usually distributed through an RSS feed. Now, if we look at the two together for today's, just for context for today, PR in the podcasting context is using the platform, using a platform as a means for guests to share knowledge, their experiences through stories, inspire listeners, build credibility for both the guest and for the organization, and to reach new audiences. So what we're going to look at today is basically look at that from our lens. So the objectives for our masterclass today is to discover how podcasts can be a valuable PR tool along your personal, your work, and your Toastmasters journey. I want to illustrate how you can use it to amplify your voice, build communication and leadership skills, but also we're going to talk a little bit about planning, recording, and promoting your podcast. And also we'll talk a little bit about AI. When I first started podcasting in 2006, there were only about 7,000 or 8,000 podcasts. It took about 10, 12 years to get to about 500,000. Now there's probably 4 or 5 million out there with over 100 million episodes. Fun fact, the term podcast was coined by a BBC journalist and a Guardian columnist, Ben Hammersley, back in 2004. Some of you might know who he is. And the term is actually a portmanteau. He took the word iPod and he took the word podcast and he put them together. Now, some of you might think, well, audio, it's going to go the way of the dodo bird like DVDs did when digital technology came out. But I want to impress upon you that audio does have its place. It can live nice and happily within video, and there are certainly some benefits. I know some of you still use this. I don't know if you can see it. Oh, there we go. It's a pen, right? It's an analog device. It's easy to use. It's portable. You can stick it to your pocket. You don't have to plug it in and worry about batteries. Well, similarly, audio podcasts are a lot like pens because they, in fact, are portable. You can listen to them just about anywhere. They're also easy to use, and they're also easy to edit. Now with AI technology, editing video in sync with voice is getting a little better, but it's a lot easier. Audio is also non-intrusive, so you can basically or literally listen to audio while you're doing the dishes, while you're in the car, while you're out for a run, maybe even when you're supposed to be working. Video, a little bit more challenging, especially if you're in the car. Interesting statistic from Nielsen is that they discovered that people will listen to 80% of a podcast. So podcasts can be 2 minutes, they could be 20 minutes, it could be 2 hours. Typical average 20 to 30 minutes. If someone can listen to 80% of what you have to say, I think you're going to get a lot of mileage out of that, as opposed to 2 to 3 minutes on a typical video where people are going to click through. If you want, you can record video, strip off the audio, and use it as an audio podcast. So I wanted to impress upon you the fact that audio is still alive and it's still well. Now, for those of you who are Toastmasters, and I think probably everyone here in the room is a Toastmaster, you'll discover that a podcast, in many respects, is a lot like a speech. Podcasts can entertain you, they can educate you, they can inform you, and they can persuade you. Now, with an audio podcast, there's no visual. However, if you can create compelling stories, you can create a visual in people's minds so that they can actually make that story their own. And it can be extremely powerful. Now, the downside of it is that as Toastmasters, the downside is you're always going to be evaluating. Every time you listen to a podcast, you're going to be evaluating. You're going to listen for ahs and ums and ers. But hey, well, maybe I guess it's probably a good thing with feedback. When we look at podcasting, I ask people to, let's look at podcasting from three sides of the mic. And when I talk about three sides of the mic, I usually get this glare or this stare and going, what, Greg, what are you talking about? When we talk about three sides of the mic, we talk about the point of view. So the point of view from three sides of the mic is you can have a podcast point of view from the perspective of the audience, of the guest, and of the host. And you can gain some PR value from a podcast by listening, by participating, and by creating. All three of those. Now, if I asked you, okay, what's the value to a listener listening to a podcast? Well, it'll be entertainment. I might learn something new. Perhaps I'll be a little bit more informed or keep current on something. But I want to impress upon you that there's a lot more PR value listening to a podcast. Here's just a few. Listening to a podcast can give you inspiration for content. We have interviewed Daniel Rex. In fact, we interviewed him twice about the Toastmasters 100. Daniel Rex is an incredible storyteller. He has a lot of history. He's got a lot of insight. He's an expert in many areas. And when you listen to him speak, you can gain some ideas and say, hey, you know what? That's a great idea for a speech. That's a great idea for a podcast. That's a great idea for an article. Or that's a great idea that maybe I want to try something out. That's listening. There's also networking opportunities. Perhaps you hear a podcast just like Madam Jordan did, and she reached out. So there's a networking opportunity there. Or perhaps you've heard a podcast and you have a guest that's been to a meeting 2-3 times. He hasn't decided to join. And this is something he might be interested in. You share that podcast with him. Maybe then he'll decide, wow, this is a reason. This is why I should join podcast. Or maybe there's that individual young man or young lady or old man or old lady or person that you want to have a conversation with, but you're perhaps a little shy to do it. Share a podcast with them. There's a way to break the ice. I guess I digress from our topic. But listening to a podcast is also great for your personal growth because you gain some listening skills, and you also gain some insight by hearing different perspectives on things. And the other nice thing is the storytelling. I just love some of the stories that are told. And I love to hear the stories, but I also like to listen to the way that they're delivered because I want to try to always master that craft. There's always a better way to tell a story. You ever notice that when you tell the same story over and over that it usually changes? Well, it can, by listening to other podcasts, you can change sometimes the way you tell your story to craft a narrative that's going to work best for you and for your audience. So that's the beauty is just in the storytelling, and I'll be mentioning storytelling a few times. So that's just from the perspective of the listener. From the guest perspective, well, there's a great opportunity to practice your table topics or your impromptu skills. Think about that. And you can talk in front of millions and millions of people if you have a big enough audience. Being a guest on a podcast also gives you an opportunity to showcase your skills. Perhaps you're promoting a product or a service. You can let them know about that, or even just show the way that you can present and answer your questions. You can expand your personal brand by allowing people to get to know you a little better, and you can also build relationships at the same time. Plus, if you're looking at an opportunity, there's million podcasts out there. Not everyone is going to be suitable for you to be a guest on, but if you find that you have a Pathways project and you need an outlet, there's certainly a good opportunity. There's certainly a good opportunity for that. A good friend of mine, Peter Kosselin, he is 95 years old. He's been a Toastmaster for 55 years. He started 171 Toastmaster clubs, and I think another one's coming. He also mentored young Daniel Rex when he first joined Toastmasters to help share with him how to build clubs. He once said to me, he said, Greg, he said, whenever you're going to go out and you're going to talk, you're going to do something, make sure, even if it's outside Toastmasters, make sure that you can get credit. I think getting paid sometimes is actually good, but getting credit, that's also great too. So there's lots of options and opportunities to do that. Now, of course, we talked about the listener, we talked about the guest, and one of the reasons why we're here today is create your own podcast. The beauty of creating your own, well, it's yours, and you can control the message, you can control the content. As a host of the Toastmasters podcast, of course, I have some leeway, but of course, I do need to report to Toastmasters International. You can decide who your guests are, and again, it's all yours. Now, with respect to PR value, everything we already talked about and more. And then there's a few things that I discovered that I never thought of. In fact, some of this came about just by researching and putting together this session for your group, is that the PR value of being a host, again, it's everything we also talked about, but it can also show you as a thought leader, but not by answering the questions, but by asking the questions. And by asking very strong questions, you showcase your knowledge, you showcase your ability to prepare, you showcase your curiosity, and then you could be known as someone who dives deep into topics and brings out the best in others. And sometimes it's needed, because I've interviewed authors as an example, and maybe I'm talking about their book. You may have heard authors being interviewed on podcasts. Now, sometimes they're great at the writing craft, but they're not a public speaker. You encourage them to join Toastmasters, but when you're on the episode with them, you need to find a way to help them bring out their story. You can build relationships and establish rapport. The interesting thing about building relationships is you don't know what's going to happen from it. You can be invited to be a guest. You can be invited to host other people's podcasts. You can get work out of it. One interesting thing happened. A gentleman named Oscar Santolaya, we interviewed him for the Toastmasters podcast, and he was doing a session. He wrote an article on using metaphors. So we interviewed him for the podcast. He found out that I had a tech background, so he asked me to be a guest on his podcast called Time to Shine, and he was doing it in the format of a fireside chat. It's a little less formal than a Q&A. I'd never done a fireside chat before. He asked me to come on and talk about tech talks, not TED Talks, but tech talks with another lady, Heather Flanagan. So I did that. And I found that so fascinating that ToastCaster, I had him on my other podcast, which I'll mention later, to talk about fireside chats. I thought it's a great format. It's a great medium. I don't know if it was serendipity or not, but last spring, my district governor approached me and said, we're giving a CNL, our Communication and Leadership Award, to a Dr. Shauna Pandya. She's an individual from Edmonton who is an astronaut, and she's going up in space. And she said, we'd like you to do it as a fireside chat. Thankfully, I had some of that training and some of that practice, so it really helped make a difference. So you can build, those are the kinds of relationships that you can build. You can demonstrate your skills as being a good listener, also demonstrate your skills as being an interviewer. And the last one is interesting, and it relates back to what I had mentioned earlier about the author, is it can also help you become a good story builder, in the sense that when you're interviewing someone, number one, you can't talk about their entire life, their whole life that went on. You can't, if you're talking about a book, you can't discover the whole book. Or you might have someone that's having a struggle. So you can build the story by crafting your questions to follow a certain type of flow so that you can end up with an episode or a podcast that is best suited for your audience, right? So you want to go in a certain way. So I might be interviewing someone about space, but we're a Toastmasters podcast. We want to talk about leadership and communication. So you can guide it and you can angle it in that way. And it takes, and you develop that over time. For someone like a new author who's struggling to speak, what you're doing is you're pulling the story from them and you're able to be the bridge between them and the audience. And it takes time to develop that. And I'm constantly working on that. So there's the PR value of actually being a host. Now for PR, so now you can see that a podcast can be a great tool. Now with any tool, right, you need to know why you're using it and what it's good for, what its purpose is, whether you're talking about a computer, a tablet, or a screwdriver, right? And so you need to figure out, where do you start? And as Simon Sinek says, what's your why? If you're going to have a podcast or just do a single episode, there needs to be a why. Now, if I put it out there to everyone in the audience and I said, okay, Toastmasters podcast, can you tell me what its why is? Most people would probably say, well, it's to promote Toastmasters, the brand and the product, and it's to promote communication and leadership in the organization and get people to join clubs. And you would be correct. However, there would be a more brilliant answer. And the more brilliant answer is the real why of the Toastmasters podcast, which I will share with you now, is its raison d'etre, or its why, is to amplify the words, the stories, and the photos of the Toastmaster magazine. So we will interview people that have written articles, were featured, were quoted, or perhaps are subject matter experts in the field. And that also includes, every year we interview the new international president, we interview the accredited speakers, we interview the world champion of public speaking, we interview the communication and leadership award winners. With a magazine, there's only limited space, right? So whenever you're reading an article, you go, well, what about this? And I'd like to know a little bit more about that. Or you might have a question after reading something. Well, that's where we come in. We take that and we take that and we amplify it. The other thing we do is by interviewing an individual, we're now putting a voice to the written word, which I think could be very, very, very powerful. There's currently about 270, I believe there's 271 episodes, and we publish it twice a month. Now, I want to give you an example that I think will fit for today's session. For those of you who were around back in 2016, this is a lady named Sarah Safari. She appeared on the cover of the Toastmaster magazine. And as you can see from the headline, Surviving Everest, this young lady was literally hanging off of Mount Everest when the earthquake hit in 2014. And that was when 20,000 people were killed in Kathmandu. And she was hanging for life. And she came on the podcast. She was a Toastmaster. She immigrated from Iran to the United States and decided she wanted to climb a mountain. Again, she's also a Toastmaster. And she was recounting this story, and it was just gut-wrenching. And every time I think about it, and every time I talk about it, I still get these shivers down my spine, which I'm getting right now. There was no video, just a single picture, and just her words sharing what happened. And you can imagine the imagery that it created in my mind. In fact, she decided that she was going to go back and help the women of Nepal, helping them build businesses and helping them how to become entrepreneurs. And in fact, there is a Netflix series called Aftershock, Everest and the Nepali experience, or Everest and the Nepali. And if you want to check that out on Netflix. So here you can see the power of audio. You can see the power. You can see the power of just the stories that are coming out. And if you think about it from what we discussed, the definitions of the PR, the aspect of podcasting, it checks all the check boxes. There's a couple of other episodes. I think some of you might know that gentleman up in the right, Ted Corcoran, past international president. Love the title. That came from the magazine, Meet the Irish Oracle. And he is just a delight he was a delight to speak with. We spoke to him back in 2022. Now, sometimes you have a why of a podcast, and sometimes the why can change. So you can either create a new podcast, delete, finish it off, or you can change it. Perhaps you can rebrand it or you can repurpose it. And that's the case with the other podcasts that I do and that I started that Elizabeth mentioned that I started back in 2006. It was originally called ToastCaster Podcast for Toastmasters. And it was designed as a district podcast. Those were back in the days where there were very few podcasts. When I asked the district governor, she'd love to be my first guest on the podcast. Before she said, yes, what's a podcast? I thought that was actually kind of funny. But it was designed originally for our district. When the district no longer wanted to do it, I had a pretty good following. People were interested in communication and leadership. So I rebranded it as ToastCaster. I kept the brand name, but I rebranded it as Communication Leadership and Learning Lab. Learning Lab meaning in communication leadership, we tried different things. It's not Toastmasters specific, although a number of our guests are Toastmasters. Plus, every time I have an opportunity, I mention Toastmasters, and a few of my guests, they went and checked out Toastmaster clubs. I want to share one example. There's about 170 episodes. I want to share one example that I think is relevant for us for today. How many of you saw the Top Gun movie, the original Top Gun, not Top Gun Maverick? No, I did not have an opportunity to interview Tom Cruise. I wish I did, but I didn't, but I got the second best. I got to interview a Top Gun instructor. And that's a real thing. I got to interview in episode 144, I got to interview Dave Bio-Baranek, and he's an F-14 Rio. And the Rio is the person that sits in the back of the plane. He was also a consultant for the Top Gun movie. When his PR firm reached out to me to do a promotion on his book, they wanted me to tell the world about his book. I thought, well, you know what? There's got to be some leadership hooks here. So I reached out. He agreed to do an interview to talk about the leadership aspects. Because if you think about it, for those of you who saw the movie and you know what happened to Goose, the character, for those of you who didn't, I won't give you a spoiler. But there can be a split second between life and death with what you do when you're flying in an F-14. So we had an opportunity to talk about that, and it was a great super episode. Fun fact, I asked him if Tom Cruise actually flew the plane. No, he did not. He did not fly in those planes. He did. He actually flew one of the planes, and he said that there were actually a few of them. So here's a great example about taking a story from one industry and morphing it into another, or making it relevant to people. In fact, tomorrow morning, I'll be interviewing a fellow named Phil Wilkes. He wrote an article in the July 2024 issue of the Toastmaster magazine. And he was talking about aviation lessons, leadership lessons, learning from aviation and being a pilot. Now, here's another example. It's probably a little closer to home. And the gentleman I'll be speaking about is actually here on the call. Here's an example of a podcast where there were some changes. There was a change in the format. There was a change in the personnel, but yet it still continues to deliver what it promised to do. And that's the Irish Talkers. Paul Lamani is there. I see him on the call. As you can see on the bottom, the why of this particular podcast is it's a talk show for talkers. And it says on the bottom, all about communication, confidence, leadership, and public speaking, the Toastmasters way. So again, podcast has been around, I believe, since 2014, and they continue to deliver. Now, if you're looking to hear someone who talks in a talk show format, Paul is your guy. I wish I could be a talk show host like he is. He has this knack for continuing the conversation. He digs really deep. He knows how to get personal, and it's just a great example of a podcast. And again, one that sticks with the why. He's really good at keeping that conversation going. So again, if you're looking at creating your podcast, oops, here we go. Consider your level 4 elective, create a podcast. And again, it could be for you, your club, or even your business. And if you look at the bottom left, there's a screenshot from a Toastmasters election at international level. And you can see that there was a difference of 4 votes between the two candidates. So that was the photo that I'd used for an episode that was entitled making your vote count, as an encouragement to get people to go out and vote. And I know sometimes in some clubs, club officers, I'm sure you can attest to this, getting them out to vote can sometimes be a challenge. As it turned out, there was a recount. The results were actually reversed, and it was about a difference of about 18 or 19 votes. But it just goes to show you how important that is. And there's a podcast for it. Now, we're going to talk about, now at this point, we're thinking, okay, we're going to be doing a podcast. There's lots of things that we need to do. We don't have a lot of time to discuss it in great detail, so I'm going to highlight on some of the things. And the first thing you want to do is you want to do some pre-planning, even before you record anything or before you even touch the keyboard. Some of the things you want to ask yourself is this going to be a one-shot deal? Are you going to be doing it every week? You're going to be doing it every month? Because obviously you're going to need to be doing some planning. Where is the podcast going to live? Is it going to be on your website? Is it going to be on YouTube? Where are you going to be hosting it? You need to look at your subject, right? If you say, oh, it's a public speaking podcast, well, that's so broad. You need to narrow it down. There's a lot out there, right? Toastmasters podcast, ToastCaster, Irish Talkers, very, very, very focused. And you want to come up with a name. If I said, well, this will be Greg's speaking podcast, well, how relevant is that? Like, it serves the ego purpose, but it's not really, really relevant. Are you going to have a host, or are you going to do it yourself? Are you going to have a co-host? Those of you might recognize the gentleman in the picture, Dhananjaya Hediarachi, 2014 world champion of public speaking. We interviewed him back in 2014. I live in Edmonton, Alberta, Mountain Time. My co-host at the time, Ryan, lives in Massachusetts, Eastern Time, and Dhananjaya lives in Sri Lanka. 11.5 hour time difference for me. I was one that had to get up at 3:45 in the morning. So those are things that you need to consider. Or maybe they're only available in the middle of your workday. So that's something that you want to think about. And how are you going to record it? Are you going to do it live? Are you going to do it over the phone, over Zoom? How are you going to record it? Those are some of the things that you need to think about ahead of time. You also have a plan. So that's the podcast, but the episodes themselves, you need to have a plan. I interviewed this gentleman here. His name is Bob Palmer. This gentleman knows everything about Dr. Ralph Smedley. He's been researching him for years. He lives in California, where the original HQ is. He's gone into the library. He's gone into the archives. So when I'm interviewing an individual, I do obviously I'm going to do some research. If I first look at the article to see where the focus of the article is. So that's actually my main theme. Sometimes the podcast will shift a little bit, but primarily it's to amplify the podcast. I'll do background information. I'll see what other materials might be out there on that individual. If I know someone who knows them, I will talk to them. If I'm interviewing someone, I'm going to create some preliminary questions, and then you massage them. And you also want to have some extras just in case you need more. If I'm doing a solo show, then I'm going to have you want to have a script. Don't necessarily, want to do it live or on the fly. Or perhaps you're using a pre-recorded speech that you did, in which case you want to make sure that you've got the file. You reach out to the guests, you contact them, you get an intro, you get a bio, you find out a little about them, you find out what's important to them. But you also want to let them know, you want to share the expectations, because they might have they may try to be promoting something from a broad perspective, like example with the book about the F-14 Top Gun instructor. Well, I reached out to him and said, okay, here's the focus I would like to have. There'll be definitely a lot of opportunities to talk about your book. And in fact, he used a lot of examples from the book. But if it's someone who's promoting an event or a product or a service, I'll let them know that they'll have an opportunity at the end. And I want to let them know that this is not an infomercial. I want to add value for the audience. So I share the expectations. Then the other important element is to discuss the technology and the recording. In fact, Elizabeth reached out earlier to ask me if I had any tech requirements. We signed on earlier just to make sure that everything was working okay. Sometimes you're dealing with individuals that are tech savvy. Some are fairly new, so you may have to guide them along. So those are some of the things that you need to do with your plan. Now, getting started, you can record on just about absolutely anything these days: digital recorder, Mac, PC, iPhone. There's lots of free pieces of software out there. I use Audacity if I'm recording solo. You can use the voice memo on your computer. You might want to use GarageBand. If you're recording remotely, like we're doing now, you can use Zoom. If you're recording for a podcast where there's one or two or three individuals, there is a feature in Zoom that allows you to, oops, you reached, yeah. There's a feature in Zoom that allows you to checkbox whether or not you want multiple tracks for the different voices. And it's a good idea to have multiple tracks when you're editing in case there might be a noise at one end and no noise at the other end, or perhaps you have two people talking over each other, and then you can edit that out. We actually use ToastCaster, and I'll talk about that in a moment. And there are also services that are all-in-ones that start from just basically doing your recording online all the way up to publishing, editing, and some of them even use some AI technology. So we use ToastCaster, and what I love about ToastCaster is you can see I have options when I'm recording. I can record both audio and video. I can record audio but show video, so I can see the person at the other end, but I'm not recording video, and that saves bandwidth. Or I can just record audio with no video, which I typically do, again, because we're primarily an audio-only podcast. This is the window that we see. As you can see, I can, when I'm done, I can download the MP3, I can download the WAV. It produces a transcript. But the beauty about this platform is that my audio is being recorded on my computer, their audio is being recorded on their computer. It's then uploaded to the cloud. And so the audio recording is less susceptible from traveling over the internet. So it's actually very, very effective. So it's recording time. Recording time, test your equipment. I can't say how many times that things fail. A good friend of mine had an opportunity to interview a famous celebrity in a 3,000-seat arena. He got the interview because it was live, but there was a problem with his cable. He got no recording. There's no record of it. I'm actually sitting here just in case the recording doesn't work. I've got my iPhone just sitting here with the voice recorder going, just so that I have it for historical purposes. You want to make sure you clear everything off your computer, turn off all the browsers. If you can, plug into Ethernet. You want to have as much clear bandwidth as you can because you're going to need it, especially if you're doing it over the internet. And then I also make sure that I review the details with my guests before we start. Do a little housekeeping, letting them know that if he needs to stop and start again, maybe the question wasn't clear, perhaps he was tripping over his words like I do all the time, in which case that will be edited out. And then at the end, to make sure that we save it. Because that's the worst thing that can happen is you finish your recording and it doesn't get saved. So those are some of the things that you're going to do. Also, when you're reviewing details, you also might, initially, there might be some clarification, right? Perhaps that maybe something's changed from the time you originally contacted the person to now. You check the pronunciation of their name, because that's very, very important. So those are some of the things you can do at recording time. When you're done, so when I'm done, I'm old school, so I use Audacity. I will edit. Some people produce stuff and leave it live. I like to edit. I edit for clarity. I edit for content. I edit for crutch words. I edit for length, sound quality. I do my manipulation of the sound in case there's some background noise. And when that's finished, then what I do is I take that file and I put it into a GarageBand where I have an intro music and then an outro music. And then from there, I produce the final file that is uploaded to the Toastmasters podcast server, which is maintained by Bo Bennett. It's a separate server from the Toastmasters podcast, although you can get the podcast on Apple, Spotify, Google, and on the Toastmasters website. Upload it to headquarters. They usually will approve it. But before I do that, again, I do the narrative. So I'll write the narrative, I'll include the show notes, I'll upload the photo. And so this is what an episode might look like. I think we know Madam Matheson, past international president. We did an episode on celebrating women in leadership and Toastmasters impact. And as you see, the narrative, the basic narrative is there, and below it is actually more information, links, additional information. And then we publish it.
Great. Can I just say very, very quickly, Madam IP is in the audience. I thought you might like to know that.
Okay. Duly noted. Well, thank you very much for that. And okay, so where was I? Thank you. So there are other, I was going to talk a little bit about AI and then services that are available. This one is called, it was called Spotify for podcasters. They just recently renamed it Spotify for creators. It's all in one, starting from recording your podcast all the way up to distributing it. As you can see, it says there are all your tools all in one place. There's also an ability to do all of this on your phone as well. If we're talking about AI, a service called Podbean that I use for hosting, I don't use the AI. As you can see, here's some of the things that it can do. It can optimize the audio, noise reduction, leveling, filtering out filler words. And in addition, it can generate titles, show notes, transcripts. Now, AI, as we know, is not perfect. So you need to make sure that you go in and you check and you make sure that what it's doing and what it's creating is exactly something that you want. But the technology is getting a lot better and it's making it a lot easier. One of the services that Ryan uses, my former co-host Ryan Levesque, and I've been looking at it as well, is called Descript. And the beauty of Descript is what it does is it takes the audio and then it converts it to text, and then you can just edit the text. So if you inadvertently say Wednesday when you're supposed to say Tuesday, you can actually edit Tuesday in and it will simulate your voice and it'll say Tuesday. It actually does a pretty good job of doing it. It has other features as well. One of the things I do like is it has an AI algorithm that it takes your final audio and it does a lot of manipulation and makes it sound very broadcast quality. And I've seen some pretty good results from that. For YouTubers out there, the 800-pound gorilla, YouTube does have a creator platform for podcasts, audio podcasts. And of course, they have their own services that they use. It's not really compatible with any of the other podcast players. We do upload the Toastmasters podcast to YouTube so that you can listen to it on YouTube. So if that's the format that you want to use, that's something that you can look at. So you've got your podcast all up and running and it's great. Well, you need to tell people about it. And how do you do that? And one of the things sometimes we often forget is to ask the guests to do it. Well, you do it as well, but you ask them to share it because they probably have an audience. It's good for you, but it's also good for them because they want people to hear what they had to say. You want to ask your fans to share. Maybe you can take some little snippets, target social media, but very importantly, promote the why. Don't just say, hey, latest episode is up, check it out. No, you want to tell them the why. So check out our latest episode. In today's episode, we talk about the PR value of podcasting, right? Our guest is Greg Gazin from the Toastmasters podcast, and he's going to share, et cetera, et cetera. In fact, when Elizabeth, when you posted the poster for this particular session, you posted the poster for the session, but in addition, you also had a narrative adding value to the poster and also talking a little bit more about the why. That's what you also need to do when you're promoting your promoting your content or promoting your episode. And also you can embed the content. So if you go to the article in the Toastmaster magazine that makes reference to women in leadership, they in fact interviewed 3 of the women on the Toastmasters International Board. The audio from the episode that I did with Meta Matheson should be there on the site as well. So you can also embed the podcast in addition to having it on Google and Apple and Spotify. Now, one of the big things I want to share with you today, and this can be extremely powerful, is the concept of repurposing. And purposing, reduce, reuse, recycle. Yes, we can be green, but often we just don't have a lot of time. So if we can take podcast and use it for other material, or if we can take other material and use it for a podcast, then we can get more value, more mileage out of it. So I want to share an example here. And okay, so here's an article I wrote for Troy Media called Leadership Tips from the Book of Guinness World Records. And there's also a podcast that I talked about that as well. So what transpired here is I received an email from a PR firm out of Toronto offering me an opportunity to speak to a couple of the Guinness World Record holders and an adjudicator, a judge. And in return, they're saying, okay, we'd like you to promote or maybe review the new Guinness Book of World Records. And I thought, well, here's an opportunity. When you think about the leadership that it takes and the skills that these individuals need to have to be able to do what they do, I thought, here's an opportunity. So I went back to them and I asked them whether or not they'd be willing to do a podcast and have me interview them. And in fact, they were at the same room at the same place in Toronto. The gentleman on the right is Dr. Reverend Kevin Fast from Cobourg, Ontario, Canada. He pulled that plane. You can look him up. On the left is a small picture. Her name is Brittany Acrobrit. She's from Seattle, Washington. She stands on a cane. She flips upside down and holds it with one hand, doing a handstand, puts her feet up in the air, shoots a bow and arrow into a target 40 feet away with her feet. Wow. So I interviewed them, and what I did is I wrote the article. Then I published a podcast of the interview. A couple months later, my club, this is during COVID, my club said, Greg, can you do a speech on leadership? So I thought, well, what I did is I talked about the lessons that I took away from speaking to them, the leadership lessons from what they did. I recorded that. Then I released it as a podcast. Gives me future material, table topic material, and I'm sharing that with you here today. So as you can see how much value you can get from one piece of content. Now we're getting closer to the end. I want to mention a tool in case it's something you may or may not be familiar with. Toastmasters has a partnership with Udly. Udly is a tool that's available when you sign into Basecamp or sign into your Toastmasters account. It does audio and video. You can upload a speech. You can record a speech, again, audio or video. It will analyze it. It will give you AI feedback. Okay, it's not, you don't do that instead of your club. You still want to get feedback from your club, and it also generates transcripts. And this particular service is absolutely free. So you might want to check that out as well if this is something new and there's something that you want to try. As we get closer to wrapping up here, I just want to share, there's an article I had written called, Is There a Podcast in Your Future? And that was published in 2021. And here's a QR code and a link to the resources. And Madam Webmaster or Mr. Webmaster, I'm not sure who you are, if you want to throw that into the notes or into the chat so people, you can check that out at your leisure. It takes you to a web page. And at this point, I think I'd like to maybe open the floor to questions that you might have. And then Madam Toastmaster, if I could have just maybe 1 minute at the end. So back to you.
Okay, if you can stop sharing this so we can see you.
Okay.
Yes, so first of all, I think before we ask any questions, could we just unmute and give a huge round of applause to DTM Greg for such a fantastic presentation.
Thank you
And I
so
also
much.
want to take the opportunity to say, to recognize and welcome our immediate past international president, whom you did such a fantastic interview with. And I'm really delighted that she took the time at very, very short notice to join us. So you're very welcome. So the floor is ours. I mean, fantastic speech. I've got like 20 questions all lined up, but I can wait.
Oh boy.
I'm that keen. Okay, who wants to kick off the questions for our DTM Greg? Who wants to go first? Who's got a question?
Madam, the past president, there's a question in the chat from Molly. And she's asking, Greg, have you ever used Buzzsprout?
No, I have. That's not one platform that I've ever used. No, I'm sorry, I haven't used that particular platform. There's lots of different platforms out there, and there's pros and cons to each one.
Okay.
So perhaps maybe just Google some reviews on Buzzsprout. So no, I haven't used that one.
Yes. So it's a homework for you, Dorothy.
I was thinking of doing a podcast for my Toastmasters level 4, and then I kind of bottled out of it, and I found Buzzsprout, and I thought that might have been the right platform, but I thought I'd just ask someone who knows.
Okay.
You can certainly try. There's a number of them that are free, and some of them will give you a free trial. Now, again, sometimes free is difficult because they could disappear, but someone like Spotify, they've been around for a long time. They're fairly large, but a lot of the platforms will give you a trial. Again, if you're looking at doing a podcast, you can even use the Udly. And even if you're just looking at creating something, it's just really, as I mentioned earlier, it's an audio file. So if you want to create it on your computer, you can do that for starters. Then you can figure out where you're gonna publish it, and where you're gonna host it.
Thank you. Questions, please. Who else have got a question for our guest?
Thank you for your question, Dorothy.
Madam Zoom Master?
I just want to make a remark. Paul's partner in crime is also here. This is Toastmaster Moira.
Oh, did you hear Moira?
Yes.
Paul, you must have a question or comment. You're keen podcasters.
Well, I have to let Moira go first, but if
well, yeah, I think of course, we don't know it all, but we've been going for 10 years and we've developed over the years a format that seems to work. And we've stuck to that format. We use Spotify, we use Audacity. We don't use any AI tools other than to get a transcription of our recording. I don't know what else. I'm interested.
You vary from week to week, right? You have two different types of that you put out.
We have two different formats. We have a magazine format, which has two segments plus, well, it has three segments. One which Paul introduces, one which our co-producer Shelley Gallagher does, and in the middle we have a word of the week.
Excellent.
And
I look forward to being a guest on your show. Oops, sorry.
And well, we're looking forward to it too, Greg. And the alternate week we do an interview, which is usually conducted by Paul, and it will be anybody from the lowest of the low up to international presidents, Dan Rex, world champion speakers. We've done the lot. And we get an amazing variety, and they're always interesting.
Thank you for attending the session, and I look forward to your session.
Thanks, Greg.
Paul.
Just, it's really I was going to ask Greg a question, but let me just say, first of all, that I've got an idea for a Toastmasters podcast, which I think any club could do. And it would be awfully easy to do, if provided, of course, you have the agreement of the speakers in your club. You see, every club meeting has people who give 5 to 7 minute speeches. So each of those can be part of a podcast episode. You can show your club off so that people, and you can also record the topic session. Now, you'd obviously need agreement from everybody, but you can do this very, very easily. And, Greg will be gone, and, I don't mind offering at least a few people a bit of mentoring if you'd actually like to do it, for people who are, seriously would like to do it. But the idea that a club can show off what happens and can share what speeches are like, and they don't all have to be world-beating speeches, they can be just what really happens. I think that is an awfully easy format for a club to get content.
That's a great idea. In fact, I think I saw one place once where someone had recorded this was back in the legacy program. They recorded their icebreaker, and then they recorded their 10th speech for their copy communicator, and night and day. Just the evolution was just incredible from when they started to where they are now. But that's a phenomenal idea, and it's so much easier. The first podcast episode back I did in 2006 when I interviewed the district governor, Mona Cooley from District 42, I used a telephone with a little plunger to record into a little pocket tape recorder. That was the technology I was using back then. Because I had to talk to her on a phone because she was in a different city than I was. And she wasn't that tech savvy. Thank you for that, Paul. That's a great idea.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
I love podcasts. I've been listening to yours over many years. I think there's a great skill in how you draw out the best from your guests. I mean, you have everyone from our immediate past international president, Morag Matheson. You have world champions. You have the whole gamut of people to interview. Could you say something about the skill required to actually get the best out of your guests? What are the skills involved in that?
Well, the skill is something that evolves over time, but I look at the end result. I look at the result of the individual who's listening. I look at the win-win-win situation. The win for the club, or for example, sorry, win for the listener, the win for the guest. And then for myself, I like to make sure that I get something out of it, whether it's satisfaction or just some additional knowledge. But I look at the end goal and I ask myself, where is it I need to go so that the end result will be something that can be very effective? And does it go back to the original idea of the podcast, or does it, in the case of the with the magazine, is what we're talking about adding value to what the people were reading initially? Now, sometimes things go awry, right? Madam Matheson, you'll know sometimes we had to stop a couple times and refocus, mostly me. But that's usually where I go, or I try to sometimes you can understand the essence of what the person is trying to say. Again, it's something that evolves over time. There is an episode called Confessions of a Podcast Host, and in there we talk about things that didn't necessarily go very well. And in fact, recently I interviewed an individual where he had taken a question and gone off on a different track. And for some reason, I was focused on that and I really wasn't able to come back. And sometimes that happens. Sometimes you do have a bad day. So at the end, we talked. I tried to explain what I was hoping to accomplish, relating it back to the article. And he agreed and said, okay, you know what? I'm free in a couple of hours. Do you have time? You want to do this again? And that's what they did. And that's what we did. So it's just a matter of what the individual is saying is where is it going to take you to where you want to be? And sometimes you get thrown off because you're listening to what the individual is saying. You want to be present, but also you've got your notes going, okay, where is the next question going to go? Where is it going to fit? Oh, what he just said or what she just said, okay, that covers the next three questions, so now I'm going to have to go somewhere else. So it's a skill that develops over time. One of the things I do, and it's not for vanity purposes, is I walk a lot. I will go back and I will listen to my own episodes and see what went well and where I can improve. And it's amazing. There are sometimes I'm thinking, Greg, this is really good. I think it's very powerful. And other times it's like, what were you thinking? So it's a skill that evolves over time. Best thing to do is just try it, get some feedback for yourself, but also get feedback from others as well. And again, I'll be asking you for feedback on this session, whether you're a brand new Toastmaster or a brand new podcaster, or you have a lot of experience like Moira and Paul. I'd like to know what's going well and where can I improve?
It's very often said that Toastmasters is a very well kept secret. Now, isn't podcast an opportunity to really help to stop it being a well kept secret? How could we use podcasts for that in that way?
Well, a little bit about what we talked about is if you appear as a guest, or if you know someone that is interested in a certain topic, like if someone's interested in aviation or Top Gun, I'll share that episode with them. If they're interested in mountain climbing or what have you, share that episode with Sarah Safari. So you share those episodes with individuals, and also mention Toastmasters in your podcast. When I did that interview with Oscar Santalaya on doing a tech talk, the fireside chat person, I don't know what the official title would be, she wasn't familiar with Toastmasters. So she asked me, what was Toastmasters? And they talked about Toastmasters and what it can do and how it's helped me. So it's one of those things that can just spread all over the place.
I just want to say a few words of thanks to you. I came here with great expectations and they were hugely exceeded. Not only did you tell us about the technical aspects of podcasting, but it's the PR value of podcasting and so much more. I think you've been so generous with your time and examples, and we're truly, truly delighted to have you in District 71.